For more than 30 years, one question quietly followed two Hollywood legends. Not because of what was said, but because of what was never said. While countless stories painted Val Kilmer as one of Hollywood's most difficult actors, one man who knew him better than almost anyone else refused to join the criticism. He never fueled the rumors. He never chased the headlines. And after decades of silence, his quiet actions began revealing a very different story. One that could change the way you see Val Kilmer forever. Before we uncover that story, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we go beyond the headlines to reveal the untold stories behind Hollywood's biggest legends. Most Hollywood stories follow the same pattern. A movie is released, the cameras stop rolling, and sooner or later, someone starts talking. Sometimes it's an actor, sometimes it's a director, sometimes it's a crew member with a story the public was never supposed to hear. That's how Hollywood works. Secrets rarely stay secret, especially when a movie becomes a classic. But Tombstone was different. For more than 3 decades, people kept asking about what really happened behind the scenes. They wanted stories about creative clashes, about long days on set, about the actor Hollywood had already labeled difficult. And if there was one person who could have confirmed every rumor, it was Kurt Russell. He wasn't just the film's leading star. Years later, Russell revealed that he had taken on far more responsibility behind the camera than most people realized. As production problems grew, he quietly helped steer the film through one of the most difficult shoots of his career. Which meant, if anyone knew what Val Kilmer was really like, it was him. He had every reason to speak, every opportunity to tell his side of the story, every chance to become the source of another Hollywood headline. But he never did. Instead, whenever Kurt Russell reflected on Tombstone, he talked about the film, the cast, the experience, and when Val Kilmer's name came up, his words were always surprisingly measured. He praised the performance. Then he moved on. No shocking stories. No personal attacks. No attempts to rewrite history. Just silence. At first, most people barely noticed. But as the years passed, that silence became harder to ignore. Because something strange was happening. The louder Hollywood became about Val Kilmer. The quieter Kurt Russell remained. And that raises a question few people ever stopped to ask. Was he hiding something? Or was he protecting something? The answer isn't found in one interview. It isn't hidden in one quote. It's buried inside the making of a film that almost never reached the big screen. And once you understand what really happened during the production of Tombstone, Kurt Russell's silence begins to make perfect sense. If you're enjoying this story so far, let me know in the comments. What's your favorite Val Kilmer performance? I'd love to hear your answer. Before anyone could understand Kurt Russell's silence, they first had to understand the chaos surrounding the movie that brought these two legends together. Long before Tombstone became one of the greatest westerns ever made, it was a production many believed would fail. The script had gone through endless changes. The budget was under pressure. And just weeks after filming began, everything took an unexpected turn. The film's original director, Kevin Jarre, was removed from the project. For most movies, a decision like that can be devastating. A new director means new ideas, new priorities, and often, new problems. George P. Cosmatos stepped in to finish the film. Officially, he was now in charge. But years later, Kurt Russell revealed something that surprised even longtime fans. Behind the scenes, he wasn't just playing Wyatt Earp. He was helping shape the movie itself. From story decisions to daily production, Russell quietly took on responsibilities far beyond what audiences ever saw. His focus was simple. Keep the film alive, keep the schedule moving, and make sure the story reached the finish line. But while Russell was trying to hold the production together, Val Kilmer was fighting a completely different battle. He wasn't thinking about schedules. He wasn't thinking about budgets. He was thinking about one man, Doc Holliday. To Val, this wasn't another role. It was a transformation. He studied old photographs. He worked on the Southern accent. He researched tuberculosis to understand how the disease slowly destroyed the body. Even the smallest movements, the cough, the smile, the way Doc stood, the way he looked at people, Nothing was left to chance. Crew members later described an actor who stayed deeply connected to the character throughout filming. Sometimes that level of commitment created delays. Sometimes it challenged the rhythm of the production. But it also created something extraordinary. Because every time Val Kilmer walked in front of the camera, he no longer looked like an actor. He looked like Doc Holliday. That was the gift and the challenge. Kurt Russell needed consistency. Val Kilmer chased perfection. Neither approach was wrong. But together, they created a tension that everyone on set could feel. Not the kind built on shouting matches or personal hatred, but the quiet pressure that happens when two talented people see the same goal through completely different eyes. Years later, audiences would only remember the masterpiece. They would never see the difficult choices, the creative pressure, or the balancing act that made Tombstone possible. But hidden inside that pressure was the answer to a much bigger mystery. Why did Kurt Russell never speak negatively about Val Kilmer, even after carrying so much responsibility himself? Because what happened next changed the way Russell saw Val forever. The movie was finally coming together. But outside the set, a completely different story was beginning. One that would follow Val Kilmer for the rest of his career. The success of Tombstone should have changed everything. Instead, it marked the beginning of a very different story. As audiences praised Val Kilmer's unforgettable performance as Doc Holliday, a new reputation was quietly spreading through Hollywood. It wasn't about his talent. No one questioned that. It was about something else. People began describing him with one word. Difficult. At first, it sounded like another Hollywood rumor. But the more it was repeated, the more people accepted it as fact. Suddenly, every disagreement became a story. Every creative debate became a headline. Every rumor found a new audience. And once a label sticks in Hollywood, it's incredibly hard to remove. Because people stop looking at your work. They start looking for proof that the label is true. Then came one of the biggest opportunities of Val Kilmer's career. Batman Forever. Replacing Michael Keaton as Batman was never going to be easy. The pressure was enormous. Millions of fans already had expectations. Every decision was being watched. Every performance was being judged. But when the film was released, the conversation wasn't only about Batman. It was also about what was happening behind the cameras. Reports of creative disagreements. Stories about different working styles. Articles suggesting Val Kilmer was becoming increasingly difficult to work with. Some stories came from people who were there. Others were impossible to verify. But by then, the truth almost didn't matter anymore. The reputation had already taken control. Hollywood loves simple stories. Genius. Failure. Hero. Villain. Real people are rarely that simple. But headlines don't have room for complexity. They need one version of a truth. And Val Kilmer became trapped inside one. Yet something strange was happening at the same time. While producers and reporters argued over his personality, audiences kept falling in love with his performances. They remembered Doc Holliday. They remembered Jim Morrison. They remembered Iceman. Not because of gossip, because of the emotion he brought to every role. The public saw the artist. Hollywood saw the reputation. Those were two completely different stories. And somewhere in the middle, Kurt Russell kept watching. He saw the articles. He heard the rumors. He watched the narrative grow bigger every year. If he had wanted to, he could have confirmed everything with a single interview. One quote, one headline, one television appearance. Instead, he chose to say almost nothing. Looking back now, that decision seems far more meaningful than anyone realized at the time. Because silence isn't always the absence of an answer. Sometimes, it's the answer itself. But then, life stepped in. And suddenly, none of Hollywood's arguments seemed important anymore. Because Val Kilmer wasn't about to fight for another movie. He was about to fight for something far more precious. His own life. Asterisk before we continue. Tell me in the comments. Do you think Hollywood judged Val Kilmer too harshly? Or do you believe the stories? I'd really like to hear your opinion. Asterisk. For decades, Val Kilmer used his voice to create unforgettable characters. Soon, he would face the heartbreaking possibility of losing that voice forever. For years, Val Kilmer fought to protect his career. Then, almost overnight, his career became the least important battle of his life. The diagnosis was devastating. Throat cancer. In a single moment, the actor who had built his career around his voice was told he might lose it forever. Think about that. This was the same voice that challenged Maverick in Top Gun. The same voice that made Doc Holliday one of the most unforgettable characters in movie history. The same voice that audiences had listened to for decades. Now, it was slipping away. The treatments were exhausting. Radiation, chemotherapy, multiple surgeries. Every day became a fight. Not for another role. Not for another award. Simply, for another tomorrow. Then came one of the hardest decisions of his life. A tracheostomy. The procedure helped save him, but it permanently changed the way he spoke. When fans heard his new voice for the first time, many were heartbroken, not because they saw weakness, but because they finally understood the price he had paid to stay alive. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. The stories that had followed him for years suddenly felt meaningless. People stopped asking, was Val Kilmer difficult? Instead, they asked, how was he doing? For the first time in decades, the headlines became quiet. The rumors faded. The man behind a reputation finally came into focus. But Val Kilmer wasn't ready to disappear. Instead, he made one of the bravest decisions of his life. He allowed the world to see him exactly as he was. Not as a movie star, not as a Hollywood icon, but as a father, an artist, a survivor. Through deeply personal home videos, old recordings, and private memories, he opened a door that had remained closed for years. When the documentary Val was released, millions of people saw someone they had never truly known. Not the actor described by gossip columns, but a thoughtful, creative man who had spent his life chasing art instead of approval. The reaction was overwhelming. Many viewers admitted they had judged him too quickly. Others said they felt like they were meeting Val Kilmer for the very first time. Then came one final surprise. A moment that reminded the world why they had fallen in love with him in the first place. A return that almost nobody believed would happen. It lasted only a few minutes. Yet it became one of the most emotional scenes in modern Hollywood. And when it was over, even the toughest audiences were left in tears. Because they weren't just watching a character return. They were watching a fighter refuse to be forgotten. When Val Kilmer returned to the screen, the world saw courage. But one man had seen something even deeper, more than 30 years earlier. And that explains why Kurt Russell never needed to break his silence with dramatic words. Sometimes, the truth isn't revealed by the words people speak. It's revealed by the words they refuse to say. For more than 30 years, Kurt Russell had countless chances to tell the world what Val Kilmer was really like. Interview after interview, he was asked about Tombstone, about Wyatt Earp, about Doc Holliday, about the movie that had become a Hollywood classic. Every time, the opportunity was there. One controversial quote, one behind-the-scenes story, one negative comment. That was all it would have taken. Every entertainment website would have published it. Every celebrity news show would have replayed it. It would have become another chapter in the Val Kilmer was difficult narrative. But it never happened. Instead, Kurt Russell consistently praised one thing: the work. Whenever he spoke about Tombstone, he spoke about the performances, the dedication, the film itself. And when he mentioned Val Kilmer, it was almost always in connection with Doc Holliday. Not the rumors, not the gossip, the performance. That wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Because Kurt had seen something the public never did. He had watched an actor completely disappear into a role. He had watched someone push himself beyond comfort, beyond exhaustion, to create a character people would still be talking about decades later. Kurt understood something Hollywood often forgets. Great performances are rarely easy to create. They demand sacrifice, patience, obsession, and sometimes they come from people who don't fit neatly into the industry's idea of easy. As the years passed, time quietly settled the argument. The articles faded. The gossip lost its power. But Doc Holliday never disappeared. New generations discovered Tombstone. Film critics revisited it. Actors praised it. And once again, Val Kilmer's performance stood above everything else. The headlines had an expiration date. The art didn't. Looking back, maybe Kurt Russell never felt the need to defend Val Kilmer publicly, because he believed the work would eventually do that on its own. And it did. Today, when people talk about Tombstone, they rarely begin with controversy. They begin with one unforgettable performance, one unforgettable character, and one actor who gave everything he had. Maybe that was Kurt Russell's message all along. Not spoken through dramatic interviews, not written in headlines, but proven through decades of quiet respect. Because real loyalty doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it simply refuses to join the crowd. Asterisk, if you've enjoyed this story so far, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We don't just revisit Hollywood history. We uncover the stories hidden behind it. Asterisk. In the end, this story was never really about Hollywood gossip. It was about something much more lasting. A legacy that outlived every rumor, and a silence that turned out to say everything. Hollywood has always moved fast. Yesterday's headlines become today's forgotten stories. New stars arrive. New scandals take over. And the people who once dominated every magazine cover are often left behind. But every so often, an actor leaves behind something that time cannot erase. Val Kilmer was one of those actors. Years after the rumors faded, people weren't sharing old gossip. They were sharing scenes from Tombstone. They were quoting Doc Holliday. They were revisiting Top Gun. They were introducing a new generation to the performances that made Val Kilmer unforgettable. In the end, his work became stronger than his reputation. And maybe that's the greatest lesson in this entire story. A headline can shape public opinion, but it cannot erase genuine talent. Time has a remarkable way of revealing what truly matters. The noise fades. The truth remains. Looking back now, Kurt Russell never needed a dramatic confession. He never needed to call a press conference. He never needed to defend Val Kilmer in front of the cameras. His respect had already been there. Every interview where he chose dignity over drama. Every conversation where he praised the work instead of repeating the rumors. Every moment he refused to turn a colleague into another headline. That was his answer. And perhaps that's what breaking his silence really means. Not finally exposing a hidden secret, but allowing decades of quiet respect to speak louder than any headline ever could. Because in Hollywood, words create news, but actions create legacy. Val Kilmer's journey reminds us that people are rarely as simple as the labels they're given. He wasn't just a movie star. He wasn't just a controversial actor. He was a father, an artist, a fighter, a man who kept creating even when life asked more of him than most people could imagine. And perhaps that's why his story still resonates today. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Because the greatest legends are never remembered for the rumors that surrounded them. They're remembered for the moments they gave the world. And Val Kilmer gave us moments that will never be forgotten. If this story changed the way you see Val Kilmer, let us know in the comments. Which performance will always define him for you? And if you enjoy thoughtful Hollywood documentaries like this one, subscribe to CelebLoopX and join us for the next untold story.